I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to everyone. Today we talk about losing civilian control of the military and the outbreak of a new strain of COVID. Sit tight, the show starts now. The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Brigida Santos. For our top story today, Congress has passed a $900 billion stimulus package that includes $300 per week in supplemental federal unemployment benefits, a one-time $600 check, more PPP loans, and an eviction moratorium extension for renters until January 31st. Single-family homeowners with government-backed loans will also be protected from foreclosure through the end of January and may be eligible to pause or reduce mortgage payments for up to 180 days. Notably, the bill does not include hazard pay for essential workers, but it does double the health care budget for the exclusive clinic that serves members of Congress. While this bill is better than nothing, for many people, it's too little too late. Jesse, what do you make of this?
Well, again, it's late. These people get elected to do a job, Brigida. Now, the House put forward a bill last July, and it took till now for them to get together in the 11th hour with extensions and everything else that they finally do a half-assed bill. Yeah, it's better than nothing, but it will require a whole lot more. What's interesting about this is decades ago, there was a movement in this country called Throw the Bums Out. I think that we need to bring that movement back, throw the bums out, because these guys put themselves first and then their party ahead of the country completely. I mean, look at how they're taking care of themselves on this deal. They doubled the money to the place they go to get their health care. And when we're speaking of health care, isn't it interesting how they don't want us to have government-run health care, but that's exactly what they have. When the president got sick, they put him in a helicopter and they took him where? Walter Reed Hospital. That is government-run health care. So it's good for them, but it's not good for us. I say it's time we start looking for the next election and follow that old cliche that happened a number of decades ago. Throw the bums out, all of them, because they're putting themselves ahead of the country. And when you're in public service, that's not what you're supposed to do.
In other news, U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, are blaming Russia for a large-scale cyber intrusion into U.S. government agencies and private companies. Targets of the breach include the U.S. Treasury and the Departments of Homeland Security, Defense, and Commerce. Russia denies the allegations, of course, and President Trump points the finger at China. Foreign hackers allegedly gained access to U.S. computers by pushing a malicious update into software by SolarWinds that was installed on computer networks of government agencies and private corporations. Hacks like this highlight the need for strong encryption tools and technology, which, ironically, the U.S. government doesn't want consumers to have. Now, a few years ago, the U.S. government suffered a very similar cyber intrusion, and it doesn't seem like it's learned from that. Jesse?
No, it doesn't. And it also looks to me like we have an administration right now that was sleeping on the job. They're not doing anything. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that is public safety. That's number one when you're an elected official. What are they focusing on? Trying to overturn an election, talking about bringing in martial law to hold new elections and everything like that. Try doing your job. If you'd have done your job in the first place, you probably would have gotten reelected.
President-elect Joe Biden is preparing to take over on January 20th. Now, he's chosen retired four-star Army General Lloyd Austin to serve as America's next Secretary of Defense. The problem is, Austin is technically ineligible for the position. Under the law, a service member must be out of uniform for at least 7 years before taking the top civilian defense job. General Austin has only been out of the Army for a little over 4 years. Still, Congress can waive the cooling off period and confirm him. Congress has only made an exception to the law, though, 2 times since 1947. The last time was in 2017 under President Donald Trump with the confirmation of retired Marine Corps General James Mattis. The Founding Fathers believed the military should be run by a civilian because military forces were widely seen as an authoritarian threat to democracy after World War II. Jesse, as a veteran, what do you make of this troubling bipartisan trend in recent years? And what are some of the potentially dangerous things that can happen when countries give up civilian control of the military to career soldiers to steer the ship?
Well, the problem is this. The forefathers put the 7 years in there for a reason. Like they said, they want it civilian run. Now, I think it's a good idea that you have someone with a military background eventually running the Department of Defense. You should have expertise both as a civilian and as military. But you need that 7-year grace period. I'm against this. I don't like it when they change the rules like this and bend them. They won't do it for other things, but on this, apparently they will. It's nothing personal against the general who's been nominated. But the problem arises of possible conflict of interest. He's only been out 4 years. And many times the interest is in the military-industrial complex, and ironically, that's where he's been working the last 4 years. I would feel much more comfortable by having a true civilian taking over this position rather than someone who just left the military 4 years ago. Too much conflict of interest. That's why they put the 7-year limit in there. And again, there's our Congress bending the rules to suit themselves. But yet, do you think for a second they bend the rules for you and me?
No. Unfortunately not. Now, while we're talking about the military, an explosive report published by The Intercept reveals that Afghan operatives in an elite CIA-trained paramilitary group have killed over 50 civilians, including children, in a series of 10 raids between 2018 and 2019. The night raids in Wardak province targeted the Taliban, but the victims were reportedly rarely members. Instead, the raids resulted in the deaths of dozens of innocent people. The alleged U.S. war crimes, and U.S.-led war crimes, I should say, include massacres, executions, mutilation, forced disappearances, and attacks on medical and civilian housing facilities. Now, the U.S. claimed it was entering Afghanistan 19 years ago to protect civilians from terror. But Jesse, what does this sound like to you?
Well, you know, people need to remember this, and they always have to remember this. Anytime a war starts, guess what? The civilians are always the biggest casualties. More so than the combatants, the civilians are. This is Vietnam. Welcome to Vietnam, a new generation. That's what you have here. A police action where we go in with supposedly good intentions, but those intentions dissolve when you're in a combat area for, what is it now, 20 years, even longer than Vietnam. Atrocities like this are going to happen, and they're getting worse. We need to get out of there. Either that or Trump needs to stay in and get reelected because he's probably going to have more war criminals that he has to pardon because of the wars we're involved in. And I say this, whatever happened, here we go again, throw the bums out, because Congress is supposed to declare war before we go to war. I know everybody's heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again. Why are they not doing their job? All the wars we're fighting in since World War II have never been declared. So technically, the Geneva Convention doesn't even apply to them. Let Congress start doing their job and declare war when we go to war. Enough of these police actions. This is 20 years in Afghanistan, and what have we accomplished? Nothing.
In health news this week, as countries began administering vaccines to protect people from COVID-19, Britain has announced a new outbreak of a more contagious form of the virus. The mutated COVID strain reportedly enters the cells of the human body much easier than the original strain spreading worldwide. Britain has implemented another lockdown, and at least 30 countries have since banned travel from the country. But it's probably only a matter of time before the mutated virus spreads across the world. Now, it's too early to tell whether the new strain is more deadly, but so far, scientists say they believe vaccines will still be effective and that people who have already contracted COVID-19 are unlikely to get this. Now, new variants and strains of the virus have been detected since the very beginning of the pandemic, but this one is apparently more serious because it infects people easier. Jesse?
And that's going to be even tougher because us here in the United States, we have a problem with people social distancing. We have a problem with people wearing masks. And now they've determined this new one spreads even quicker and faster. Hopefully the vaccine works against it, that all indications are that it will also work against this new strain. That's what these viruses do. They change themselves. They're changelings. And as you move along. But what I find is interesting here, there's talk of banning people from United Kingdom from coming here now because they have this new strain of the virus. I'll bet you if it was a Muslim country, they would have already banned them from coming here. Think about that a minute.
Yeah, of course. Now it's time for a break. When we return, Jesse sits down with director Stefano De Vrij to talk about youth activism in America. We'll be right back.
The world according to Jesse. I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. The Day I Had to Grow Up is a new documentary about youth activism in America. The film showcases 16 activists and the events that shaped their political lives. Joining me now is the director, Stefano De Vrij. Stefano, what inspired you to make a documentary about youth activism in America?
On February 14th, 2018, the Parkland shooting, I would say, was the first sort of beginning. There was a series of different events, obviously, but that was really the real beginning when I felt like it was a watershed moment in a generation that kids that I hadn't experienced that type of violence that was at school. I was curious about different types of activists that were happening at different points. I saw the Parkland happened, and I got to meet some kids that were involved in the Sunrise Movement with climate change and climate justice reforms. And I started to see this wave of activism in this generation that was way more politically active than I was, 10 or 15 years ago. And they obviously felt in their environment that they were living in conditions, whether it was high student debt crisis, whether it was the climate crisis, whether it was school shootings, that for them felt insurmountable.
Now, how old were the activists you interviewed, and what kinds of policies or issues were they trying to change?
They were all 17 and 18 years old. There was nobody older than 18 years old. Every single one of them had different specific issues. One girl in specific, Sarah Salyani, talked about student debt crisis and also having to do with how public schools are funded. Getting involved at such a young age and seeing sort of how she moved around in her own personal life to see how public schools were funded very differently depending on what zip code you lived in.
Well, can you give us some examples of ways they've participated as activists? Did they organize marches or speak at Congress or anything like that? Congressional hearings?
Yeah, so one specific kid, Jeremy Ornstein, we had filmed him. He starts off in the beginning of the film protesting against Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party. They're outside. They're part of a group called the Sunrise Movement that wants to have Congress enact climate change reforms. And you see these kids come day in and day out. On another example, you have a March for Our Lives movement, kids that are speaking at the March for Our Lives movement involved with Parkland. And you're trying to capture a breadth of an entire group of kids in different political facets, and their ability as people to work things out through policies are extremely, just as challenging as it is to grow up. They're also figuring out what policies will stick, which ones have been tried before, and which ones are really pushing for. I would say the March for Our Lives one was probably the one that was the most personally touching for me.
Now, has youth activism led to the passing of any new laws or any other successes?
I would say that the most important thing that you would see in 2018 was when we started this documentary was right before the the House Democrats took over in power, and I think that that aspect of youth getting involved push these policies, and definitely in a dialogue of people who talk about where the Democratic Party is going or where politics is going, pushing that party a little bit more on the progressive side. That has an impact. That definitively has an impact on sort of the greater majority. And I would say that you know, I think that all of us have a sense of how we're going to contend with these social media is also something that I didn't want to deal with in activism. I didn't want to deal with this because it was like the elephant in the room. In the documentary, you see how these kids are using social media, in every single one of them mentions it. So there's a sense of talking, an echo chamber, but how it actually gets implemented is still, to be involved. On one sense, you have people agree with you more, already who have already agreed with you, but on the other sense, you don't really get to meet people from another side. So the level of dialogue is diluted in a sense. And that's what I would say.
Did any teen activists you talked to express a desire to run for public office in the future? Are they going to get involved and get elected?
Yeah, all of them. I think all of them, especially Sarah Salyani in Pennsylvania. What's nice about the documentary in The Day I Had to Grow Up is that they, especially Sarah Salyani in Pennsylvania, some of them identify not necessarily with any political party, being Democratic, independent, or Republican. I think that's one of the important things that I like about the doc. When someone comes to me and says, Stefano, I like this documentary. I'm a Republican, or I'm a moderate Democrat. That means a lot to me. And I think that those kids are all very different. They all want to run for political office. They all have different specific points of view. But Sarah Salyani in specific, in the state of Pennsylvania, would be somebody who is very interested in that. And especially, I would say, Violet Kopp in Brooklyn. On the municipal level, they all have an understanding that the municipal level has a big impact into sort of the general national narrative, which is sort of what we're that's thrust upon us sort of in this, in the world of political spin.
Right. Now, youth activism seems to be rising, of course. Young people have participated in protests against racism, police brutality this year. They've also led climate strikes inspired by activist Greta Thunberg. Why do you think young people are taking action now when they haven't in the past? Why now are they rising up?
I think that for them, they feel that there's an environment that is almost unsurmountable. It's either whether it's the perception of that it's unsurmountable, whether it's or whether it's actually the case. But there's a confluence of things that are happening where they feel that the world that they're inheriting is not a world that they can do well in. Again, I want to bring up student debt. You tell kids that college is not important, and they come out with $200,000 worth of debt. You can't help but see kids. Speaking about Greta, kids in California who are getting schools shut down because of constant wildfires every year, over and over again. You don't have to be a political person, and I think that's the point of showing these vignette stories, that these are just these are kids who got involved in politics out of necessity. I would say that's the reason. They're seeing an environment that for them it seems insurmountable, and they need to do something to speak up.
Now, aside from...
I also want to say one more thing, Jesse.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that one of the things I realize about I'm less idealistic than some of the younger kids, but one of the things that youth has is that it presents a point in time where, kids can sort of see the pain of the world, but also the possibilities. They come at the intersection of criticality and hope. So, they see the world's possibility, but they also see the world's pain. And that's an interesting part that I think I also learned to, come back to a little bit of my idealism when I was in the documentary, working on it for 2 years.
Now, aside from marching in the streets on a particular day or posting on social media, what does the future hold for young activists? Are they organized? Do you think we'll finally see more people, young people, voting than ever before?
Well, we saw a lot of young people voting in this last election. So I would say yes to number one. And number two, on the municipal level, we have to talk about the municipal level. These, getting involved, as governor of Minnesota, it's not sexy to do policies. Policy work is not an attractive thing. It's gridlock. It's a lot of negotiating. And these kids that I spoke to, all of them that are in the documentary are aware of that. That's the other side that's unseen of activism, that is the necessity. It's the glue. And I think that all the young activists in the documentary all have that thread inside.
Now, before we go, we're running short on time. What can we learn from the spirit and tenacity of young activists?
Well, we can learn that dialogue is extremely important, and that these kids are not as uninformed as we think, right? That they're experiencing the world, and they're going to be here. They're going to be the next generation pushing up, whether we like it or not. We have to parent them, mentor them, involve them, because if we neglect them, they'll go another way. So better for us to develop this relationship of being close and understanding what is affecting youth, rather than throwing them away.
Wow, to me it sounds like I'm reliving the 60s all over again in a whole bunch of different ways. Director Stefano De Vrij, thank you for your time. Thank you for this film. People need to see it.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you so much. All the best to your family.
All right, you too.
The world according to Jesse.
Let's turn to the viewers. We asked people online what they're grateful for despite the hardships that they've faced this year. Sweet Apple Pirate says, I'm very grateful for the time to work on creative development and related projects. Grateful that I'm aware of how corrupt the U.S. government and media establishment has become, but I wish it didn't affect my mood quite so much. Jesse?
Well, I think it's that way for all of us a little bit. You're feeling closed in. You're like under house arrest. We love our homes, but we're spending far too much time in them. I think the writer's very correct. You got to find things to do. You got to take up hobbies. You got to smarten yourself up. Do things like that. But don't get overreactive to all the news you're forced to take in.
Exactly. Bill says, despite being laid off earlier this year and I'm still searching for a job, I'm grateful for my pets, my friends, and being alive. And then he says, wishing you and yours a very safe and happy holidays, Jesse.
Well, thank you, Bill. You're a guy that's facing a lot of adversarial positions today. Times are tough, but you got the right attitude. You got the right attitude, because love will bring us through this thing. It really and truly will. Keep that attitude up. Good luck to you and your family and loved ones, and happy holidays to everyone out there. Keep your chin up and keep the fight going.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for watching. Send us your comments on Facebook and Twitter for a chance to be featured next week. As always, we're going to be back with more stories ignored by the corporate media.
And remember, when the government lies, the truth, yes indeed, becomes a traitor. Wear your mask. Social distance.
The world according to Jesse.